From the Times and the Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Manveen Rana. When you're the world's richest man who's built his fortune on mastering technology, the last thing you want to have to explain is a technical glitch.
Hello, everyone. My apologies for the late start. We unfortunately had a massive distributed denial of service attack against our servers. We think we've overcome most of that, and so it's now time to proceed. But as this massive attack illustrates, there's a lot of opposition to people just hearing what President Trump has to say.
The Trump campaign were billing it as the interview of the century. But when it began, more than 40 minutes late, it was more of a rambling chat between two people who seemed to agree on everything from the economy to immigration.
I believe, you believe this too, you hear 12 million. I believe it's over 20 million people came into our country, many coming from jails, from prisons, from mental institutions, or a bigger version of that is insane asylums, and many are terrorists.
We don't have a secure border, and we have people streaming over like it looks like a World War Z zombie apocalypse at times.
These are rough people. These are really rough people coming across, and I know rough people, and these are people that we don't want in our country.
For Elon Musk, it was an opportunity to draw people to X, the social media platform he paid $44 billion for, and to remind them, as he does regularly with his tweets, where he stands politically.
Obviously, what's happening overnight is they're rewriting history and making Kamala sound like a moderate when in fact she is far left, like far left.
Worse than Bernie Sanders. She is considered more liberal by far than Bernie Sanders. She's a radical left lunatic. And if she's going to be our president, very quickly, you're not going to have a country anymore.
Crucially, for the avoidance of any doubt, it was the moment when Elon Musk could publicly endorse his favourite for the presidential election.
I think we're in massive trouble, frankly, with the Kamala administration, and that's my honest opinion. And I think really it's essential that you win for the good of the country for this election, and that's understating my opinion.
This isn't the first time that Elon Musk has waded into politics. He's railed against COVID lockdowns, the war in Ukraine, China policy, and transgender issues. And recently, he's turned his attention to British politics by tweeting about the riots. But why is the world's richest man, a tech bro, getting involved in politics? What's Elon Musk's game? The story today: the political transformation of Elon Musk.
I'm James Ball. I'm a journalist and author, and I specialise in misinformation, radicalisation, conspiracies, so I tend to be quite busy.
And James, you're quite busy on X too. You know, I follow you, I see you there. Has it been a difficult decision to stay on the platform recently?
I think if I didn't cover Elon Musk and if I didn't cover X, I would have done a lot more soul searching about staying on it. Someone sort of has to be there to watch the chaos and to track it. And it's a lot harder to cover a network you don't use. The odd thing is, Twitter was almost starting to get a little bit back to normal. It was almost getting a little bit like it used to be again. And then Elon set fire to the whole thing once more.
Yeah, I think it was the election. I think people came back for election news and it was funny and full of memes and jokes, and then suddenly it isn't again.
Yeah, there was a brief time when you remembered what you liked about it and when it wasn't just endless, oh, look, thousands of racists. Oh, look, loads of abuse. It was, as you say, hey, this is the easiest way to stick in real time to something I'm interested in. And elections are intrinsically funny. Lots of ridiculous things happen. And so Yeah, it was a lot nicer. And now it's a real bump back down to earth.
Well, James, Elon Musk has quite directly waded into British politics in the last few weeks. A lot of this began with one particular post that he retweeted. So just take us back to that moment. Talk us through what happened.
So Elon Musk's got quite a big habit of replying with just one-word replies, true or concerning or interesting, nothing very valuable on its own, but to what can be quite extreme posts. And towards the sort of earlier stages of the riots, he shared a post from Tommy Robinson, who, of course, is a far-right figure in the UK. He's been prosecuted for various things. And he was banned from Twitter/X and reinstated by Elon Musk. So that alone would be a bit of a roll. But Elon Musk's got 193 million followers. And the way he's tweaked the algorithm means that if he replies to a post, it dramatically boosts its visibility. And it could have just been a one-off at the time, but he replied to this Tommy Robinson post, it boosted it a long way in the algorithm, and he followed it up not long after with civil war is inevitable in the UK. And given the framing of these riots as being somehow about legitimate concerns over immigration, it does start to tap into a far-right narrative around race wars, about inevitable society clashes that I think were beyond where he'd gone before. And of course, he then went a lot further in the days after.
And James, as you point out, Elon Musk, rather than seeing the effect of his words and backing down, questioning what he was putting out there, instead seemed to take on the British government. Just talk us through the week that followed.
The UK government's largely actually ignored Elon Musk. He's had criticism from the media, he's had criticism from some MPs and some spokespeople, but there's no big attempt to prosecute him. X hasn't been taken offline, there's no arrest warrant out for him. But Musk doesn't like the idea of someone telling him what to do, and he reacts badly against it when it's a US regulator, when it's a government. And so he's really escalated. He's suggested the UK would introduce the death penalty for tweets, that we have the thought police. He's likened the rioters to sort of the heroes in Star Wars or in Hunger Games. He's sort of painting the UK as if it's a sort of North Korean-style dystopia. And he seems to live for the fight, but not in any sophisticated way. This isn't some political operator or some business genius who's trying to engage in 4D chess. This just looks like someone, if you didn't know better, you would say it was a teenager who didn't have enough friends, who was spending too much time on the internet and could only get their kick from picking fights and seeing outrage. That's the standard thing of a troll, and they tend to have quite sad lives. And you would hope that the life of the richest man in the world was a little bit more full of interest and full of excitement than that. But that seems to be where he's getting his kicks.
And he is just repeating lines we're seeing elsewhere, two-tier care, stuff like that.
Yeah, he hasn't come up with anything of his own. I mean, the odd thing is he's not a very interesting social media poster. And he's got hundreds of millions of followers, sure, but he's got them because of who he is and how rich he is and what he owns. He's actually a really quite bad social media poster.
I love hearing that from the expert.
If it weren't for the fact he's a rich and powerful man, he would just be another anonymous troll among thousands of anonymous trolls.
And he does control the algorithm. His posts do get seen by an inordinate number of people. And while he's had this little foray into British politics, it's not the only place he's interfering effectively politically. He's also been wading into the American election. Tell us a bit about that.
Musk has openly endorsed Donald Trump this time.
Appears to an exciting, inspiring future that people can look forward to and be optimistic and excited about what happens next. And that's the kind of future that I think you'll bring as president, and that's why I endorse you.
He's set up and offered the platform. He has done a long conversation with Donald Trump on Monday evening.
I think it's obvious that you're a believer and an advocate of free speech, because during your first term as president, you were attacked relentlessly every day, often very unfairly with false attacks. And you didn't try to shut down the media. You didn't try to inhibit their freedom of speech. And I think that says a lot.
The good thing is that you and I have, and some people, very few, we can get the word out. Although sometimes it's hard because they don't want to print it. Like we're having a great conversation right now. Kamala wouldn't have this conversation. She can't because she's not smart. She's not a smart person, by the way.
There is all sorts of activity like that. So he's openly taken a stance in US politics. He briefly got interested in French politics when it looked like Marine Le Pen's National Rally would be the biggest party. He sort of rapidly lost interest when she finished in third. One of his favourite influencers that he tweets and posts quite a lot is an Italian nationalist influencer. He sort of bounces around the global right and far right and gains and loses interest in causes. He's sort of stuck with the UK a bit longer on this one, but it does feel like it's just another one on a long list. He sort of sees a post that agrees with his view and shares it, either not caring if it's true or assuming that it's true. And for someone who wants to project himself as the level of genius that he is, both of those options are quite troubling.
It's also quite troubling for X. That's exactly the sort of posting, according to its official guidelines, it's not supposed to want. I mean, as part of his campaign in the American election, in somehow getting involved, he'd repost a deep fake of Kamala Harris. I know you've seen it. Just describe what's in the video.
So the video is presented as if it's a campaign ad. There's a fairly unconvincing deepfake voice of Kamala Harris sort of doing the voiceover. And at first glance, you could think it's a real advert, lots of smiling crowds.
I, Kamala Harris, am your Democrat candidate for president because Joe Biden finally exposed his senility at the debate. Thanks, Joe. I was selected because I am the ultimate diversity hire. I'm both a woman and a person of color.
But essentially in it, Kamala says that Biden was senile, an agent of the deep state. She would pledge to be the same.
Remember, that's a good thing if you're a deep state puppet. I had 4 years under the tutelage of the ultimate deep state puppet, a wonderful mentor, Joe Biden.
It says that she's a completely unqualified diversity candidate. Anyone who criticizes her for anything is racist and sexist. These are very, very boring and well-trodden tropes on the US far right. But these kind of deepfake political videos are pretty widely agreed across the international spectrum to be exactly what we don't want and exactly what can harm politics. Now, I don't think this one's going to fool anyone because it's not very good. But just because it's bad, as in not very competent, doesn't mean it's not a problem. And the fact that the owner of a network that's supposedly against this stuff is sharing this is really bad. Like, Twitter still plays a huge role in the news ecosystem, and the US election is likely to be quite close. And there is every chance that if Donald Trump loses, he will claim he's won. And the fact that someone who's willing to share such blatant misinformation is in control of that network could really make a febrile situation much more dangerous.
James, just take us back to how Elon Musk has managed to acquire quite so much power over the state of public discourse. I mean, he'd made a fortune, he'd built his reputation on big tech firms, from PayPal to Tesla, Starlink. And then in April 2022, rather inexplicably, he buys Twitter for $44 billion, a hell of a lot of money. Why did he do it?
It's very hard to find a rational business reason as to why Elon Musk bought Twitter. And largely, it looks like he bought it because he had to. He bought up a sort of fairly small percentage of Twitter, not very much money for him, and got offered a seat on the board, and then essentially fell out with the people involved. And I think found that having a board seat didn't do what he wanted. And so he put in an offer to buy it. And I think what he hadn't quite realised was Delaware courts are very good at actually making binding contracts binding. When they actually went to court to enforce it, Musk essentially got told he would definitely lose. And so he then had to look like he wanted it. Because even if you're as rich as Elon Musk is, and he's worth 200 and something billion, most of that isn't cash. 44 billion is a lot of money to anyone.
Yeah.
And it was much more than Twitter was worth. And so essentially, once you've bought something for too much money that you probably didn't really want, if you're the kind of person who can't back down and isn't willing to say you've made a mistake, he has to look like he wants it. He has to look like there was a big idea behind it or a big mission.
So what was that justification? How did he explain it?
So he's turned it into, this is going to be the future of speech. With Tesla, he's doing the future of travel. You know, self-driving cars, green cars around the world. SpaceX is, I will get humanity off Earth. Starlink is, I will control the internet. This was, I will be the future of news. X is the most reliable news broadcaster, he says, completely falsely. It will be YouTube. It will do payments. It will be the media company to own them all. And he needs a reason why people will want everything from X rather than the many, many diverse places we have now. And most of us don't go, hey, I'd really love my bank to also be my TV program and my social media network. That's not how normal humans think. And so he's had to really lean in on free speech. And the only people who think there's actually major free speech issues on these networks at the moment are the far right.
So he has to make Twitter all about free speech. He has to criticize the way it was before. Talk us through the changes he started to make when he took it over. How did he start to try and make that happen?
So when he took it over, he claimed that he was very concerned about bots and spam and this sort of content on there, and decided that the way to solve that was to sell blue ticks. Now, the blue ticks there were what verified someone was actually a journalist or actually a public figure, and so might have credibility on what they were talking about, and they were quite strictly controlled. Elon Musk gave them out to anyone for $8 a month. And then he changed the algorithm so that they are very heavily boosted in the algorithm versus other users. They appear first in the replies. They are sort of harder to track out in other ways, and they could post long videos. And so he essentially made it so that people could pay for reach. And quite quickly, that meant that the algorithm, instead of sort of prioritizing credible, high-quality sources of information, posted the ones that got the most engagement and posted the ones from paid-for blue ticks. And Musk likes to boost this as saying, this is the real news. This is what the mainstream isn't telling you. This is what you should be paying attention to. And so the current flavor of that is him posting lots of very biased accounts of the sentences of people on the far right, sort of suggesting people have gone to prison for copying and pasting a tweet, which is totally untrue.
I suppose we should say that Elon Musk would argue that he's providing a platform that defends free speech. That seems to be his big thing. He tweeted just last week about his alarm at the degree to which freedom of speech was being undermined around the world, and he called it the bedrock of democracy. And I suppose we should say that despite those posts about people going to prison for what they've tweeted, he is actually still cooperating with the authorities when it comes to those potential breaches of the law.
One irony in all of this is that actually, even under Elon Musk, X/Twitter still helps prosecute its users. X actually now complies with the vast majority of law enforcement requests against its users, and a higher percentage than it used to. So again, on one level, Elon talks about free speech a lot more than the old owners of Twitter, but he doesn't necessarily back it up with sort of legal defense for its users. And so far as we know, that cooperation with the UK is still actually ongoing behind the scenes. So he's picking a fight in public, but in private, you know, these users that think he's on their side might find that their details have in fact been handed over. And because they've got their blue ticks, X knows where they live, it knows their names, it knows their payment details. So there's an odd sort of conflict to it all.
And in terms of the fringe and others, I mean, Tommy Robinson wasn't the only person he brought back to Twitter, or X as he renamed it. Talk us through the list of people who were suddenly welcome again.
I mean, he's brought back a fairly astonishing range of people. He initially didn't bring back someone like Alex Jones, who is a US conspiracy theorist who is currently in the process of bankruptcy because he owns hundreds of millions of dollars to the families of children killed at Sandy Hook in a school shooting. And he had suggested that that massacre didn't happen and was a false flag operation, and he lost libel suits. So Alex Jones is now on Twitter, and others who are very extreme QAnon conspiracy theorists who boost the idea that Hillary Clinton is a satanic ritual child murderer. You've got quite a lot of accounts that have engaged in some really quite serious online harms and often criminal conduct or conduct that's led to hundreds of millions of dollars in fines back. He did, of course, reinstate Donald Trump. A lot of these people have very significant social media followings on Twitter or on X, much bigger than other networks. Instagram has always lent towards the visual. Facebook doesn't really want news and current affairs content. Twitter was where it went for discussion of politics, discussion of real-time events. And so for a lot of these figures, it was their main platform. It wasn't that easy to get banned if you had a huge following on Twitter. They often gave multiple warnings. Conduct tended to have to be either quite directly racist or directly involved in incitement. And when accounts have big followings and political involvement, these decisions are taken at quite high level. So the list of people who were banned had generally really earned it. And in some cases, initially, Musk didn't do a blanket reinstatement, but more and more, as he was goaded on by his new fan base, he brought more and more people back.
And part of his justification for that is about free speech. I know Elon Musk also claims that X is a place that provides a clear and immediate way to refute anything false, adding that the same is not true for legacy media who, according to Musk, lie relentlessly. But if Elon Musk justified this slightly mad move of buying Twitter for an extraordinary amount of money as creating a great free speech platform, this digital town hall, has it actually worked?
It depends on what he wanted from that. If he wanted somewhere where all of the people who agree with him get boosted and he gets feted as a free speech hero, he's got that. Is Twitter a good place for political debate? Absolutely not. I did an article last week sort of suggesting that Elon Musk needed to face some kind of consequences for his actions. And I counted about 9,300 mostly abusive replies.
Oh, wow.
Now, and I checked, this is an actual count, not a made up number.
James, poor you.
And if that's the cost of engagement in the public sphere, most people will retreat from it.
Yeah.
This is not how you get a good public debate. This is not how you get robust and healthy civil society. You actually do need rules to have good conversations and to have good debate. And he's sort of actively undermined those. And so you've generally seen only the people with very thick skins who have sort of had years of abuse and it sort of rolls off your back, like me, stick around there unless they agree with Elon Musk. And most sensible and well-rounded people say, well, you don't want me here. You've made it progressively more hostile for me to be here. And so I leave. And so if he actually wanted a better public square and a better public discourse, he's failed spectacularly. If he wanted his side to be in the ascendancy and to feel like he's won a big cultural battle rather than a diminished and quite fringe social media network, Twitter is a lot smaller than YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, you name it. It's much smaller. If he just wanted there to reflect his values, he's won.
And talking of his values, we have seen Twitter completely changed. In its new guise as X, it is a very different place. How much has Elon Musk changed? Have these always been his values? Is this all because he bought Twitter and now has to be more outrageous, or has something actually happened in terms of his own beliefs? How much has he changed as a person?
He's always been quite a strange character and quite a self-involved character. I mean, when you look at billionaire sort of tech people, they tend to be. A lot of people who were his co-founders in PayPal have tended towards the US right and often the libertarian right. Peter Thiel, who is now also the founder of Palantir, a big surveillance company, is a big figure on the US right and essentially brought J.D. Vance, Trump's vice presidential pick, into politics and funded him. So he's had some sort of background on this. He was never a classic liberal, but for years he did quite like being every liberal's favourite billionaire.
Yeah.
He owned a green car company. People like Tesla. He was in California. He made a point of supporting LGB rights, certainly. But he would make a point of pushing pride type stuff up to about 5-6 years ago. That has changed. And I think he's self-radicalized. I think for people like him, once one group starts being nice to you and another starts being nasty to you, that pushes you in some directions. And he's got this need to be right, and he's got this need to be messianic. And so when that starts happening, people do push themselves down the sphere. It's a very, very well-trodden path. You know, if people get cancelled or if people get rejected, you know, if they lose a columnist job at a newspaper or if they get a lot of blowback from their own side on politics, some manage to stay where they are and stay quite level-headed, but some suddenly find that their new friends on the right or their new friends on the left are a lot more compelling. They start saying what those people want to hear. And there's no reason to think that just because he's rich and just because he's owns the network now, that Elon Musk is any different from the rest of us, because it doesn't make sense for him as a position. For his space sort of projects, for SpaceX, he needs good relationships with governments across the world. He ultimately, most of his wealth is tied up in an electric car company. And the people who buy electric cars are liberals. That will widen out, but his core market is lefties who he's alienating.
And it has real life effects, as we've seen over the last week or two here in Britain, where every post he puts up can actually have an impact on what happens on the ground. Given how he's changed X, which is still such an important form of social media, it's still such an important way of people connecting, what can be done? What should happen? What should sort of police social media in order to make sure there isn't inflammatory language, isn't misinformation that's feeding into something that leads to a riot?
I think most of us would tend to agree that we do want free speech to exist on the internet in the same way it does in the real world. And so we don't want to be too aggressive in how we police what people can say. Where we want to look is what the social networks boost, what they allow on their site, what they take action against and how they govern it. We don't necessarily want to crack down on speech or on regular people. We want companies that are worth billions to act like responsible citizens. And so you've got various regulations governing that in the US. You've got ones in the EU. The UK's recently passed the Online Safety Act. Not all of it has come into effect, but that does require social media networks to actually enforce the standards that are listed on their site. And the standards that are listed on X are still fairly normal. They still look similar to most social networks. They still suggest illegal content will be taken down. Once the Online Safety Act is fully enforced and Ofcom are regulating it, it comes with real powers. It can impose a fine of up to 10% of annual turnover, not just profits, but turnover. Now, that's enough to make any company pay attention. It's got the powers to block sites or to act against their finances if they persistently ignore its rulings.
Wow.
The EU has got some similar powers and is an even bigger bloc than the UK. If you've ever sort of kicked a wall and you know that you've stubbed your toe and it's about to hurt really badly, but there's a few seconds before it does. I think
is that where we're
Elon
at?
Musk is in possibly, it could be a few year period of he's kicked the wall really hard and it's going to hit him in different ways. I do think there's a case for governments thinking about how do you handle Elon Musk more generally.
Yeah.
He plays such a huge role in launch to space. He plays such a huge role in satellites. He employs 120,000 people. He's amassed in some ways more strategic power than any individual in the last century outside of governments. And that needs a bit of attention.
That was James Ball, journalist and author specialising in misinformation, radicalisation and conspiracies. You can read his latest article about Elon Musk's spat with Keir Starmer and what it tells us about the billionaire at thetimes.com with a subscription. The producer today was Priyanka Delada. The executive producer was Fiona Leach, and sound design and theme composition were by Mal Lassetto. If you enjoyed this episode, do leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening. See you tomorrow.